Center for South Asia. It's an honor to be here.
Louder, please.
Louder.
Can't hear me? Okay. Well, thank you first to South Asia for having me here. It's an honor to be here and thank you all for coming today. My paper is titled, The Crane Knows Not the Glory of the Lotus, Bhakti and Carnatic Music. Bhakti is devotion. In this paper, I explore the complex convergences of the ideas of devotion, spirituality, and classical or art music in South Asia, South India, with reference to the tradition of Carnatic music, also called South Indian classical music. I consider conceptual as well as socio-cultural and political concerns that these convergences generate. 3 weeks ago, violin virtuoso Dr. N. Subramaniam performed at Broomfield, Colorado. He gave a Carnatic concert. Now, Carnatic music is a vibrant tradition of music practiced mostly by South Indians. At its heart lie the melodic generative and organizing principle of raga and the time principle of tala. In its melodic aspect, it's highly nuanced with a very unique texture, while its rhythmic aspect can get quite intensely complex. A central place is accorded to improvisation. To rise to the level of performance, a long period of training and practice is needed, during which the cognitive, aesthetic, and technical aspects of this music are internalized by the student to be refined over a lifetime or many lifetimes, as the Hindu would say. Dr. Subramaniam played 3 pieces. The first was a varna, which is a compositional form in the raga Kamboji. Most of you who have heard Indian music would know the words raga and tala and talk more about raga later. But to briefly tell you what a raga is, each raga is associated with a certain set of notes which only may be employed while performing the raga. And these notes may not occur in any random way, but only in some phrases and motifs. And there is no exhaustive listing of these phrases. So a raga, each raga is internalized much like a language. You are exposed to the raga and pick up how it goes. So coming back to this concert by Subramaniam, he performed this at a Varna composition in Kamboji. And he played it in 6 different speeds, alternating between 4s and 3s, doubles, triple, quadruple, twice triple, and so on. It was quite a feat and demanding of great virtuosity. The second piece that he played, he introduced as a song in the raga Shri Priya in praise of Ganesha, which is of course a beloved deity in Hindu pantheon. This Ganesha of a small temple in a southern state, Kerala. And the third again he introduced as a song in praise of Lord Krishna in the raga Kali. Now this is not typical. One does not introduce compositions of Carnatic music through the deity it's addressed. In the Carnatic heartlands, even Subramaniam himself, one usually mentions the raga, the tala, and the name of the composer. And yet Subramaniam thought it fit to introduce the songs through the deity that the songs were addressed, responding to and reinforcing the association of this sophisticated music with the Hindu religion. Not only Carnatic music, even the largest piece of music in India is situated in a web of myths, legends, philosophies, orientations, and beliefs that dip into the Hindu religious and spiritual worlds. Hindu gods play music. Krishna, Saraswati, Nandi, they play various instruments. And Shiva, Lord Shiva is the origin of music. But more importantly, the gods are pleased by music, are immensely pleased by it. In a well-known story, Ravana, the demon king, in Aradham strives to lift the Mount Kailasha on which Lord Shiva and Parvati reside. And Shiva is incensed and he just presses his toe on the mountain and Ravana is crushed. The repentant Ravana beseeches the Lord to release him, but to no avail, until Ravana fashions a lute out of the sinews that he plucks out of his body. He fashions a lute and he plays it. And he melts the god's heart. This idea of melting the hearts through music is very central to Indian music. And Lord Shiva releases him. Music itself is regarded sacred. Instruments are regarded sacred. Musical instruments are regarded sacred and auspicious. Instruments are worshipped. Music as a means of liberation and salvation is found in texts like Yagyavalkya's Kriti, which is an 8th century text. It says, he who knows the depths of playing music on the veena and the subtleties of tones, microtones, time, etc. can, without effort, aprayasena, ascend the path of liberation. This idea of discipline and correctness of performance still holds great importance in Indian classical music. And finally, and very important.
Can everyone hear?
Not really.
Yeah.
Speakers. Could you perhaps come forward? This is the word as loud as it can get.
So maybe everyone come forward.
Don't you have a microphone there?
Is there a microphone?
Yeah,
No,
but she
no.
said it's not working.
Oh, it doesn't work.
Oh, microphone's not working. So maybe can people move forward?
Well, I could come here, but I'm meeting. Yeah.
Those who can't hear,
What point is
come
big?
forward.
And finally, importantly, we have the Bhakti efflorescence. Hundreds of voices across the subcontinent singing the glory of Rama, Krishna, and Shiva and other Hindu deities in the vernacular, in active supplication or fierce passionate love or in mad mystic trance. Bhakti, love for the divine in India, is inseparable from song. Music, religion, spirituality in India have multiple points of confluence. When asked about the stories of Bhakti poets and a particular coming together of Bhakti and song, Bhakti is devotion. That is one of the most well-known cultural movements in India. When asked about the stories of these Bhakti poets and the coming together of devotion and song, Paramacharya, the great teacher, one of the widely venerated pontiffs of the Advaita tradition of the last century, said that Ava Hadi Peraville Petradai Padinar in Tamil. They did not attain spiritual heights through song. They sang of what they had achieved. So music as an expression of religious, spiritual ecstasy and music as a means of liberation, both ideas coexist in India. While music is thus associated with the transcendental worlds, Carnatic music is explicitly associated with the religion of Hinduism. In its genesis, evolution, and composition and content, the Hindu connection is real, and this puts some at unease. Some see in this connection a constraint placed on the universality of the music. As an art music, it should not be tied to any religious tradition. This aesthetic consideration apart, such a connection offers opportunities for divisive agendas in the society that India is today. Carnatic music self-reflexively believes that in its origins lie in the Hindu empire of the Vijayanagara of the mid-14th to mid-17th century, in the work of the great Bhakti poet Purandaradasa, who sang songs in devotion to Lord Krishna. With the fall of the Vijayanagara Empire, musicians and musicologists, the Vijayanagara Empire was destroyed by the Muslim Islamic invaders, Muslim empire there. And with the fall of the Vijayanagara Empire, musicians and musicologists moved south to Tanjore, where the Hindu regions of the empire offered patronage. And with a growing British presence and diminishing royal power, musicians sought patronage of the middle class community, largely upper caste Hindu, in the city of Madras, bringing Chennai to leadership. Thus, in its genesis and movement from Vijayanagara to the south, Carnatic music followed the availability of Hindu patronage. The core corpus of Carnatic compositions was created in the 18th century by the Carnatic Trinity, as they are called, Tyagaraja, Dikshidhar and Sharma Shastri. All three were devout Hindus, Brahmins, and composed in styles that were quite divergent in the textual as well as musical aspects, but all the compositions are of the Hindu pantheon of gods. Their compositions called Kriti have been the pivot for a typical Carnatic concert of the past century or so. Kritis are set in specific ragas and tadas, and they have been handed down through the disciples of the composers with great concern for retaining the composer's text and musical output and intention. Tyagaraja, more than any other composer, defines the Carnatic imagination and identity. His compositions, mostly in the vernacular language of Telugu, exhibit a wide gamut of moods in melodic form, but his hold over the imagination of the Carnatic world derives not just from this musical genius, but also from this life story of utter devotion to Lord Rama. He practiced the Uncha Vritti, going around the village, singing songs in praise of the Lord and collecting alms for sustenance. He turned down royal patronage. The lore is that the king invited him to the court, and he is said to have sung. There's a song that is supposed to reflect the situation. Mamata bandhana yuta narastuti sukhama, he says, praising a mere mortal is mired in the anxieties of the ego, and asks himself if this is bliss or is devotion to Lord Rama. Is that bliss? Above all, his songs are the true worth of music. The reassertion of ancient ideas have yielded an impact on the Carnatic world. Sangeeta Jnanamu Bhakti Vina, knowledge of music without devotion is not the right way. Echoing the idea in Yajnavalkya Smriti, he says, those who know the secrets of the music, of notes, of their origin, they find liberation. In another iconic composition, Moksha Mugalada, he says, is liberation possible for one who is without musical knowledge suffused with bhakti? And the composition Swararaga Sudhara Rasayuta Bhakti, from which I draw the title of my talk, Bhakti expressed through the nectar of notes and ragas gives Apavarga on liberation. He goes on to say, what if a crane or a frog were to find a lotus? Do they know its glory? Can they get at its nectar? Pursuing music without an understanding of its true worth and potential, which is the potential to offer liberation itself, is like a crane or a frog on a lotus. It is wasted. Tyagaraja thus situates the pursuit of music in the spiritual realm. He had a strong disciple lineage who popularized his compositions and life story among the middle class Brahmins in Madras, which was becoming the center for Carnatic music by mid-19th century. By the beginning of the 20th century, the movement for freedom from British imperialism had started picking up, and alongside the political movement was a cultural one to revive and reclaim indigenous cultural glory. Many leaders of this movement in Madras were devout Hindus and mostly from the Brahmin community, the caste traditionally associated with learning. The educated elite took leadership in inventing Carnatic music as the classical music of South India. Leaders of the cultural renaissance felt the need to identify and strengthen a musical tradition that was sophisticated and could appeal to non-specialists. There were musical genres that were either too disorganized and lacking in authenticity of authorship and aesthetics, or were too complex, revolving around virtuosity and almost entirely lacking in any emotive impact. Kritis or compositions of Tyagaraja and others were seen as being appropriate core repertoire for classical music presentations. Their relative melodic and rhythmic complexity, dignified text and musical setting, and the fact that these were seriously carried forward in the lineages of disciples of the composers, plus their religious and spiritual message, all made them the apt choice. There was another repertoire of songs practiced and carried forward in the courtesan tradition. Songs that were romantic, even erotic in content, but they were highly nuanced melodically, displaying great musical sophistication. Even today, they are regarded among one of some of the finest compositions in Carnatic music. But this repertoire was well known, but was sidelined in favor of the Kriti. These padams and javalis were relegated to tail-end pieces in a concert, in a Carnatic concert, and have slowly become obsolete for various reasons. The Kriti is positioned in Carnatic music has only grown stronger. Lakshmi Subramaniam in New Mansions for Music says that the compositions of Tyagaraja and others had circulated and come to enjoy artistic status with several practicing musicians who had moved to Madras city, and most of who laid claim to the lineage of the Trinity. Repertoire had a clear and assigned authorship, a perception that carried enormous weight with a middle class that was attempting to modernize a tradition within a framework of textual conventions. She goes on to say, a complex convergence of social changes and cultural practices associated with the formation of a new urban elite generated competing discourses of aesthetics, authenticity and meaning, and split the performing tradition into high art, secular music and popular ritual music. This split between high art as different from ritual, I submit, was never in the nature of a clean break. The new high art secular music called Carnatic music continued and continues to be pressed into service on religious occasions. For example, the ritual congregation and performance of the compositions of Tyagaraja to mark the birth anniversary of the composer has little to do with secular art and is more in the nature of a ritualistic offering. Concerts are organized around religious days and festivals, and the musicians typically honor the religious significance of the day by including compositions in praise of the relevant deity. Such a project to identify or invent high art as different from ritual music was no doubt the result of the impact of the Western gaze and the colonial anxiety of self-worth. Raghavan says, V. Raghavan was a highly respected Sanskrit scholar and prolific writer of the mid-20th century who was deeply involved in the cultural world and was president of the Music Academy in Chennai, which was and continues to be the epicenter for Carnatic music. He writes, foreign visitors and musicologists all too frequently ask us, what is your folk music? What is your classical music? And what do you understand by these names? Raghavan goes on to say, to evolve a principle and to conduct ourselves according to it is a mark of culture. It is true of forms of art too. In art music, which we may call classical, we're still struggling with these expressions, art music, classical. The canons and requirements of art, the rules of balance, harmony, proportion, propriety, concentration on pure artistic resources to the exclusion of adventitious circumstances. These are to hold sway and absolute sway. This is his idea of what art music would be. And yet, men like Raghavan would abhor the idea of a music that negated the received tradition, the musical tradition or the religio-ethical, aesthetic, the religio-spiritual or the ethical tradition. The idea of the independence of the aesthetic that emerged at the brink of modernist upheavals in Europe had also rendered the aesthetic and the religious as disparate realms. To apply this idea of art and aesthetic to a music that was religious in its genesis, core repertoire and practice was conceptually problematic, though it wasn't deemed as such. Many Carnatic musicians themselves of today and previous generations, they have a perception of music that includes the artistic and the religious spiritual dimensions in interesting relationships. Shemamudi Srinivas Iyer, one of the greatest Carnatic musicians and himself a devout Hindu, says that bhakti or devotion is important in music, in Carnatic music, but it is bhakti for the music. He says the musician's approach to the art must not be like that of a master, but rather like that of a devotee. We'll return to this idea later, but it's important here to assert that even if a larger perception, its connections with ritualistic Hinduism remain, many musicians themselves are acutely aware of and concern themselves with the art of Carnatic music. T. Vishwanathan and Matthew Hart Allen in Music of South Asia, they say, there is an ongoing debate in South India among lovers of Carnatic music about the importance of text vis-a-vis music, while the devotional nature and artistry of the Kriti texts are treasured, many music lovers argue that the attention of the listener in a Carnatic concert should be more on the music than the text. Today's professional musicians look for compositions that give them what they call scope, to demonstrate the depth of the musical system and to provide outlets for their virtuosity and creativity. Let us see what a Carnatic presentation typically involves in terms of content, form, intention, meaning, and virtuosity. Let's quickly go over what happens in a Carnatic concert. We have compositions, of course, Carnatic compositions, which are religious in content, but they are musically complex, and their musical settings have been carefully handed down through the disciple lineage of the composers. The manner in which text and music come together, above all, the aspect of the raga that is captured in the kriti, this is of importance in these compositions. And then we have improvisation. Alapana is improvisation without time cycle. Which is creating a melodic edifice using the material of the raga. And other aspects of improvisation are Neraval, which is a single line of the composition, and a build-up of recurring tension and release, playing with the raga, time cycle, etc. And then you have the Swara Prastara, which involves solfege sung in varied spontaneous patterns, and these maintaining split-second perfection with respect to the time cycle. But raga is the presiding deity of Carnatic music. The music is ultimately geared towards evoking the raga, leading to a perception of the raga. I have argued elsewhere that this raga bodha, or cognition of raga, is central to the performance and experience of Indian classical music. Raga is an abstract entity. It is a source of melody for composition and improvisation, while each raga is associated with a grammar and a framework of rules that might include a scale, notes to be highlighted, phrases, etc. No raga is ever captured in a framework that can be articulated by this. The greatest value is placed not on pedantic correctness of rendition or virtuosity, but on bringing out the raga bhava, the luminous emergence of the raga, especially in its emotive aspect. To many practitioners and listeners, Carnatic music is about ragas. The content of its compositions, the religious content of its compositions, is a historically contingent feature. The problem here is, granted that raga is the heart of Carnatic music, yet the ultimate source for our understanding of ragas are these compositions, these and other compositions. So in a deeper sense, the kritis are at the heart of Carnatic music. So Carnatic music, a complex and sophisticated music, with musicians keenly aware of their art, is entwined in a mesh of the religiosity of Hinduism. Performers of early 20th century, especially women performers, willy-nilly contributed to a conflation of these two worlds. Complexity of improvisation is considered the acid test for a Carnatic musician. When women singers tried to claim a place for themselves in the Carnatic world, as can be expected, it wasn't easy going for them. Women singers could easily break into the world of singing songs, but not improvisation. Actually, could you play that, Andrew? I wanted to play a short clip of performance so that you have an idea.
Do you need some help?
I think we do this. No, it's not there. There it is.
There you go.
Oh, it's not small yet.
play. This is a clip of a performance of a composition. And then there is a bit of improvisation. I'll just fast forward to it.
Is it okay this way, or should we try and get this?
योगीन्द्रसायिनं गुरुकुशलदायिनं योगीन्द्रसायिनं गुरुकुशलदायिनं
Now this is an improvisation.
You gotta bring the cursor back to the. Down there. Good.
Okay, so that was a performance of a composition. There's a great deal of improvisation, how the accompanists come in, and nothing is really rehearsed or anything, except of course the composition is practiced. Practice is one thing, but rehearsal is another. So there was a short clip of the composition and then a bit of improvisation. So I was talking about women singers. So women singers could easily break into the world of singing songs, but not improvisation. This was regarded difficult, unfeminine. Even performing the tada, which is how you was putting it on the you sit, you squat and play the keep the time cycle on through your gestures, through hand gestures. Even performing the tada, that is the reference for musical time and which is indispensable for complex improvisation. Even this was frowned upon because it was regarded unladylike. M.S. Subbulakshmi, M.N. Vasantakumari, T.K. Pattamal and Brinda were the first 4 early and successful women performers. And in a field dominated by male musicians and an audience who had difficulty accepting women being competent performers, early women musicians adopted strategies, knowingly or otherwise, that bolstered their visibility and acceptance. This was by playback singing in films as well as by releasing commercial recordings of bhakti music, bhakti songs, of devotional songs which are relatively easy, not melodically complex, where the entire intention is to convey the religious devotion, not the music. The music is just a vehicle. So MS was perhaps the most associated with bhakti. She wore her own devotion gently but transparently. Her renditions of hymns in praise of this is MS. Her association with bhakti began early in her career with her portrayal of the great devotee Meera's life on celluloid. That portrayal and those songs had such a reach that her association with bhakti was sealed. When she sang proper Carnatic compositions too, their bhakti content was obviously important to her. Though she worked hard at her classical repertoire and improvisational skills, she never did gain respect for them, something she was aware of and sensitive to. MLV gained respect because of her highly imaginative improvisation, but she too gained a status of household name through her renditions of devotional songs, Tirupavai and Purandaradasa. D.K. Pattamal sang Deshabhakti songs in devotion to the motherland. Only Brinda held her own and did not enter this race for acquiring visibility through singing bhakti songs. Her musical legacy held little place for easy repertoire of this kind. She was too proud of an artist. She came from the courtesan tradition, as did others, but she was very, she was very careful to reject that heritage. And she was regarded an exquisite musician, but never did win popular following. I don't claim that it is entirely because she did not deign to sing easy devotional songs, but that was very likely a factor. Male singers of their generation did not release such commercial recordings of devotional songs per se. When a couple of them did, they presented them like pieces in a concert with improvisation. So the two worlds of bhakti and art, despite attempts to keep them apart, were conflated again and again in the history of Carnatic music of the 20th century by the careers of these pioneer women singers and the following generations of singers. The legacy of bhakti literature is also reflected in tail-end pieces that are usually rendered in a Carnatic concert. Stratton Hawley has this to say: Carnatic singers are expected to bring their displays of virtuosity to a rousing conclusion by performance of a series of popular pieces from around the country to display their range, Marathi abangs, etc. Now, while it is true that these songs from across the country in various languages are included in a Carnatic concert, quite at odds with the serious nature that the concert is supposed to exhibit. It is also true that there are many performers, Carnatic musicians, some of them front-ranking, who refuse to pander to this expectation of offering lighter songs from the bhakti repertoire. Now, other issues have emerged from the connection of Carnatic music with the Hindu religion, the characterization of Carnatic music as Hindu music for and by Hindus. Despite its connection with the Hindu religion, Carnatic music is not generally called Hindu music. It is classical music after all, and so not restricted to one community. A couple of years ago, however, when a few Carnatic singers sang songs in praise of Christian deities and one of them was scheduled to sing them in a public congregation of Christian devotion. There was a furor and ugly threats issued by self-proclaimed protectors of Hinduism, leading to a couple of the Carnatic musicians backing down. These threats, no doubt, were made by elements emboldened by the right-wing government in power in India today. This might not have happened in an earlier time in another political environment. The background to this controversy was the Christian appropriation of Hindu religious tunes, Hindu practices that are offered to converts as easy and familiar ways of organizing their lives and giving meaning to them. This upset even sober and tolerant Hindus. The charge was that the Carnatic compositions were being similarly tweaked to give them a Christian content, so that a composition in praise of, say, Rama or Krishna, a Hindu deity, was tweaked to substitute a few names and adjectives. And here, when we had a composition in praise of Christ or Mary. Now, this ugly and sordid side of the phenomenon of Christian conversions in South India, that apart, it was felt that Carnatic music and musicians should not be dragged into these controversies. Commentators pointed out that there are indeed older Carnatic compositions with Christian deities at their heart. Christians and Muslims have made significant, even if quantitatively minimal, contributions to Carnatic music. The secretary of a Sabha is an association that stages concerts. He's told me, responding to various facets of this infashioned controversy, he told me that we will not tolerate appropriation of Carnatic compositions or changing them in any way, even substituting Rama for Krishna. That will not be tolerated. Leave alone Yesu or Jesus. Yes, there are compositions in praise of Jesus and other gods or other prophets, and performers are welcome to sing them in our sabha, so long as the audience accepts it. And he seemed quite doubtful that they would. What is the place of bhakti in today's Carnatic music world for performers and audiences? Sanjay Subramaniam and T.M. Krishna. Sanjay Subramaniam was the fifth that I played. They are leading male performers today, and they engage with the religiosity of Carnatic music compositions in different ways. Both are the face of Carnatic music today, and while immensely popular, they are also regarded by purists as being among the best of Carnatic music. Both are extremely conscious of the artistry involved in Carnatic music and are themselves consummate artists and very effective performers. Both are Brahmins by birth, but neither is devout, and both are possibly atheists. When he was a rising star, Sanjay told me that he was being pursued by recording companies to record a commercial CD of devotional songs with instrumental interludes, something that we don't have in Carnatic music. He told me, and I'm translating from Tamil, that they are standing on their head to get me to do this, and I'm equally standing on my head, refusing to do so. So the line between singing Carnatic compositions, which are devotional, and other religious compositions is quite clear in most cases. Sanjay includes Tamil devotional verses and bhakti repertoire in his concerts, but he renders them in an unmistakably Carnatic idiom. That is something of his USP. If a concert is held on a particular religious occasion, he acknowledges it by including compositions in praise of that relevant deity. T.M. Krishna, on the other hand, did not include a single Tyagaraja composition in a concert to mark the composer's anniversary, to pay tribute to the composer. He did not sing a single composition of the composer himself. But this is recently, when he set out a couple of decades ago, on his own admission, he donned the appearance of a conservative devout Brahmin. An album called Bhakti Manjari includes compositions in various attitudes of devotion. And moving away from a Carnatic musician who used its association with Hindu religiosity, he used it, and he says everybody uses it. Krishna now disowns his earlier personality. He says, I can't have a conversation with that Krishna. He strives to expand the listener base of Carnatic music beyond the upper caste Hindu by taking it to diverse audiences. He sings in churches, synagogues, fishermen colonies, and includes compositions by Christian Carnatic composers and sings contemporary poetry in his concerts. In an interview, he says, if art has to transcend human boundaries, then it has to be that constant, deliberate effort to push the human being and the art form to transcend it. The questioner asks, is there no divine being pushing it? He says, no, I don't believe it. And then the questioner asks, there is no bhakti? To which Krishna says, bhakti is a different word and divine is a different word. That is, devotion is different, divine is different. Bhakti cannot become a trap. If you are going to get trapped by Rama, Allah or Jesus, that is not bhakti. These are just formulae, a control group. Bhakti is an intensely beautiful idea, but inherent in that idea is the freedom to dive in and dive out. Chemambudi Srinivas Iyer said the same thing. He was Krishna's guru, incidentally. He said that Srinivas Iyer said, just as we offer fresh flowers in devotion to our deity, our devotion to music will bring out fresh music. Bhakti is devotion to a personal deity of one's choice, or Ishtadevata, and involves a complete loving surrender. That is MS in concert. This is T.M. Krishna. Humility is an absolute necessity. When Carnatic musicians and listeners talk of bhakti, it is often in the sense of this surrender in humility rather than devotion towards the deity of the song. But this surrender in humility ensconced in love is of the same order as the love of the bhakti poet for her deity. The inspiration and texture of the Carnatic musician's devotion is drawn from the world of the bhakti saints. One of the most memorable concerts I have attended was by Sanjay Subramanian, in which he presented a composition that speaks of an outcast devotee who wants to go to a temple, and in those days lower castes were not given permission to enter temples. So this outcast devotee yearns to go into this temple and have darshan, to see the deity. This is the story of Nandan. The name of the devotee is Nandan. And there is a series of suite of songs that charters his life and how he finally, Lord Shiva works a miracle to make the darshan happen. And Sanjay sang a very famous composition, Tiruvadi Charanam in Raga Kamboji, in which the poet says, I come to you having complete faith in your divine feet. And it was a very stirring concert. All of us in the audience were moved. And the line that he took up for Neraval, improvising on that line, was, I have come beseeching you, you cannot push me away. Uttering your name, Hara Hara, should be enough for you to offer me grace. Don't push me away. And this line was taken up, and it was a brilliant build-up. And the song has been sung famously by many stalwarts before Sanjay, and Sanjay molded his presentation after one such past master. Why? The intent, the vitality of his own creativity showed through. So everyone in the audience was deeply moved. The flowering of the raga, the poignance of the song, the intensity of the music making by Sanjay and his accompanists. When the piece ended, and this concert was held in the Music Academy, which is the most prestigious venue for Carnatic concerts. When the piece ended, quite unexpectedly, a member of the audience stood up and cried, Muruganaka Harohara, which is a victory cry for the deity. Now, the music had transported everyone, and we could all see where that victory cry for Lord Murugan was coming from, even if we ourselves wouldn't engage in that behavior. We looked at Sanjay on the stage, and he looked for a moment at the audience member and then simply looked away and resumed singing as if nothing had happened. Now this is the apparent dilemma or conflict. Sanjay offered music through that song, that performance of the song and improvisation had much meaning for everyone. Kamboji, the raga, its majesty, many hues, past masters who have sung it memorably provided gripping accompaniment to it, the evocative text, the voice, the dynamics, the brilliance of improvisation, the interaction among the musicians, the balance and coming together of all these elements, and on the other hand, not necessarily at a disconnect, but even seamlessly merged with these musical aspects. The idea of the temple at Chidambaram, the deity, the glorious sense of awe when in the presence of the deity, the story of Nandan and his devotion. There is so much meaning in a performance such as this. Just because Sanjay sang a composition in which a wretched outcast seeks to receive grace of the Lord, does it make it bhakti music? Does it make it Hindu music? Or music of the oppressed caste sung by a Brahmin? If Sanjay himself is an atheist, as seems to be the case from all accounts, then what does it mean for the performance? Or can we say that all this is irrelevant, since this is classical music? The story of Nanda and devotion, etc., these are all irrelevant to this performance. Then what about the audience member who highlight? Amanda Whiteman recounts a morning conversation with her violin teacher. The conversation is triggered off with the teacher starting to teach a famous Tyagaraja song, Rama Nandu Drovaraja. O Rama, won't you come to protect me? This song leaves the teacher rambling through varied topics such as devotion of Tyagaraja, of MS, when she sang it as an expression of her own sorrow, leading seamlessly into the teacher's views on the iniquities of man, woman, the superiority of woman, of marriage, and so on. And Weidman wonders, what history can make this possible? Indeed, what history makes such a maze of different streams of thought from a single song possible? This I thought was an interesting question. Compartmentalization is not the only way. Things can coexist. Sanjay's concert could be a supremely artistic experience and a religious one, or just one or the other, or one after the other. The aesthetic can coexist with the religious. Carnatic music can be seen as a vibrant musical tradition which can transcend its parochial associations for those who are outside the religious tradition, while affording a richer, multi-hued experience for the insiders. Carnatic music can be dissociated from all religious content. It is possible. Carnatic music is fundamentally about ragas with a unique melodic texture and way of presenting ragas. A new set of secular compositions can be created, but the present corpus of compositions is the tradition that holds together the community of performers and listeners, organizers and critics in richly complex ways. Thank you.